Welcome to the Phoenix Prosperity Podcast, where wealth meets legacy. Join your host, Tim Fergestad, as we explore the journeys of Phoenix's finest to success and beyond.
Hello, this is Tim Fergestad. Thank you for joining us. I'm very pleased to have Gameil Fouad here with me today. Gameil is a fellow scientist with a Ph.D. in molecular and medical genetics. I believe that's right, yeah?
That's right.
All right. Yeah, we overlapped at the University of Utah, so where I was getting my PhD, so we're both nerds. Until recently, he was the president of Biotron Laboratories, where he ran a biomineral and supplements company. Welcome, Gameil.
Thanks, Tim. It's great to be here.
Do you want to give a little more background about how you got into biomedical research and got your training there, and then what you were doing at Biotron?
Yeah. So if we go back far enough, the whole idea that took root in my mind was actually I just loved being in the natural world. I loved being outdoors. You know, growing up in northern Utah, being able to take hikes, being able to ski, being able to ride a mountain bike was all
hard not to fall in love with that.
Hard not to fall in love with that. And so biology seemed natural. But the funny thing is, even though I imagine myself kind of out there in the woods, I love the lab. I learned that early on in college and got sucked deeper and deeper into the world of things we can't see very easily. And that's why I ended up in a genetics lab where we met a long time ago. And from there, just kind of pursued that course of study. First ending up on the East Coast for a little while, and then on the West Coast to complete my PhD in molecular and medical genetics. And actually, it was really kind of focused on heart development. But we both had some exposure to ion channels and calcium and potassium and chloride and so forth. So the leap from there to the world of mineral processing wasn't huge.
Sure.
What
got you into the lab in the first place, though? With your love of nature and stuff, was it just sort of the natural progression of going to the university?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. In fact, I kind of imagined that I would be in the sciences as a long-term career. And, this was back before you could go online and look at job postings and apply through, various job portals. So I went to student services and I looked at bulletin boards with 3x5 cards on them that had job postings in everything from engineering departments to certain, biomedical labs to, I remember I even applied for a job with the mosquito abatement district, out along the shores of the Great Salt Lake. I didn't get the job, but it looked cool. And what happened was I ended up in a lab in the Department of Neurology, of all places. I just really learned. I loved, the kind of work that was taking place there, and that steered me away from being outside to being in a research lab. It was fascinating to me, and the deeper I got into it and the more classes that I took and the more I learned about the work being done, the more interested I became, and naturally ended up in a genetics program. Genetics, of course, was my worst undergraduate class. So there was probably a little bit of, self-abuse at work as well, just trying to overcome some difficulties that plagued me early on.
Funny how I did something similar. I was afraid all my friends in high school were taking chemistry and they all psyched me out of it, that it was super hard and all this. And so I took like astronomy and stellar anatomy and something else instead. I liked physics, but the chemistry, they don't know. They told me it was so hard. That was one of my undergraduate majors was physics and chemistry in undergrad. I ended up loving chemistry.
Yeah.
And it's funny how that resistance is often our future path.
It's so true. So speaking of high school, I had some buddies. We all had a chemistry class together. And I would really sit down and work on the equations. And one of my pals, who I'm still good friends with today, he said, "Why are you doing all this work? You're never going to have to know this stuff." I said, "No, someday I think I am going to have to know this stuff. So I'll just do the work now." And sure enough, that's what I've been doing in one form or another for the last 30 years.
Okay, well, that's funny because in terms of like why are you doing this now? I mean, the kids often say that. I got teenagers, and like every time they're talking about calculus, or I learn my boys in calculus, and they're talking about, oh, this will be important, and for life skill when next calculus season comes around, right? Instead of like tax season,
right.
But I also like the life is hard, like a meme or things I've heard in the past. Being healthy is hard. Being unhealthy is hard. Choose your hard, right? Which one do you want?
Right.
Being successful is hard. Being unsuccessful is hard. Choose your hard, right? And so, which one do you want? And so those choices, I love. That's a big part of a lesson I try to for myself still too, but trying to, as a parent of like, again, children, trying to force that issue that life is a result of your choices.
Exactly.
So, but you knew early on that it was time to learn those skills. That's awesome.
Well, yeah, I mean, I knew early on, and to your point, if you're going to choose your hard, you might as well make it as easy as you can along the way. And by mastering certain things early,
Yep.
It becomes a little bit easier. Let me take that back. There was never mastery back then, but there was at least some like basic understanding, and that's really helpful as a foundation you can use to build on the next step. And I tell my kids the same thing. I still got 2 kids at home, and I tell them all the time, because it's always the math complaint. I'm never going to have to use this in the real world. And I'm like, you'd be surprised.
Yeah.
Actually, I used to say that too, but now I use that stuff every day. So it's important. It's important. And I actually believe, a little bit on a soapbox here, but I think having an education in the sciences, no matter what you do later, learning how to think critically and learning to follow the data, that's one of the things my advisor in graduate school taught me that really stuck. When you're having some intractable problem, her counsel was always just follow the data, go where it takes you.
Right. It's truth. It's right. It's fact. Yeah. It's truth. It's
if your idea is wrong, that's also a discovery, and that's also important. But you can't stick to an idea that's failing you time after time after time.
Absolutely. I want to move on, but I also want to talk about an example of how math is so important, even in fields you don't realize, right? In business and finances. But my wife is an anesthesiologist, and there was a nurse who I think didn't convert from percentages, right? And was giving like 2 orders of magnitude more dose of a drug that could have killed somebody. Just
right.
it didn't. I'm just going to be helping people. What do I need math for?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it matters. Anyway, so one question I like to talk to people about on the show is about insights into success and how everyone faces setbacks. Can you think of a particular challenge that tested your resolve and how you were stronger for having gone through it?
Oh, Tim, I could give you dozens of such scenarios. In my role at Biotron Laboratories, I always used to say, our job is to solve problems. And sometimes the problem is as simple as just getting the shipment out the door into the customer's hands on time. That's a very simple problem to solve. Sometimes you have personnel constraints or issues, you have capacity constraints and issues. And I learned really early on, one of my first blunders, if you can call it that. I was talking to a customer, and by the way, I should kind of put this into some context. We did ingredient mineral processing for food and nutrition companies. And these sorts of specialized processing techniques took some wet reactive processes, and then some drying steps, and then some milling steps to pulverize and create a powder out of these ingredients so that they could be.
What's lyophilize again, by the way?
But, oh yes, freeze drying, kind of.
Okay.
But in any case, we needed these racks. We needed some equipment to put into these drying chambers. I was talking to a customer, and we were still kind of bootstrapping ourselves back then. And I was talking to a customer who'd been with us for a while, and they painted this glorious picture of this huge volume coming at us if we could meet their targets and price points. And I was like, oh, this is great. We're all in. And we placed the order for the equipment, and we got the equipment. And
big investment on your part.
Big investment on our part, and the project unraveled. And here I am sitting with a warehouse full of equipment and the expense associated with that equipment, and no business to put through that equipment. And that was a painful learning lesson. That was an exercise in learning how to manage risk and not being too exuberant when it comes to the potential that you see before you. But as it turns out, it was a blessing in disguise, because probably within the next 12 to 18 months, another project came on, and it came on fast, kind of surprised us. And we were prepared, because now we had this excess capacity. So it's a double-edged sword. It was the pain of going through, what I thought had been a real miscalculation. I kept this saying up above my desk in the office, which said, business decisions are always made on judgments, not certainties. And so you use your best judgment. And when your best judgment fails you in a way, it can be humbling, and it can be frightening, because you think about the health of the company, and you think about all the stakeholders for whom you're responsible, including your employees and your customers and the people that you owe. You got a bunch of open invoices sit there in the corner that you got to write those checks and send them out to suppliers and vendors and service providers. So, a lot of moving pieces. And if you don't get those judgments correct, like I said, it can be pretty humbling.
Sure. There's a lot of inherent risk in business, and mitigating those is comes largely with experience, I imagine.
Yeah. Yes.
And how has that changed your appetite for risk then over time?
That's a good question. I haven't given that a whole lot of thought.
I've seen some people get burned, and then they want to do those types of projects anymore. But then I hear other people, they like, well, that wasn't so bad. Now, then they're willing to take the next step, right? That's that kind of building the courage to venture out and try new things.
Right. So I think initially it would have been the former, which is to sort of, have a heightened sense of caution and try really hard not to take unnecessary risks. But as we saw it play out, there's a certain amount of confidence that comes with seeing all of that equipment put into use. And that allowed us to take further risks. As the business grew, and as our constraints became more concrete, and it was very clear we needed to expand, it wasn't that hard to take those risks a second time and then a third time. The numbers kept getting bigger, and that is upsetting. And I'm not going to pretend like I didn't have a lot of sleepless nights, literal sleepless nights, of like, how are we going to handle this scenario and how are we going to handle that scenario? But I think that just comes with being in the business world, honestly.
And I imagine you got better at mitigating those risks as you got burned. Okay, we need an agreement for a minimum deposit or something to cover at least part of our upfront, right?
Right. Yeah. And, some of the risk mitigation was diversification a little bit. So we ventured out into other areas, initially allied areas of business. So if you're going to do a plant expansion, it's probably better to own that real estate if you can, or rather than lease it and be on the hook for it.
Particularly if you're putting big equipment in there.
Right. Yeah. And you're modifying it to purpose. It's a warehouse is a warehouse is a warehouse. And there are a lot of them. But if you're preparing to do certain kinds of processing in a very specific facility, that's not so easy just to say, okay, we'll unload it. Takes a long time to put the stuff in there and get it operational. And
right.
Not everybody's going to want it once it's in there. So, being able to control more of those variables is important.
What's an underrated skill or habit that's been pivotal to your success?
Patience. Patience. Everybody is in a hurry in the business world because, as they say, time is money, and that's true. That becomes evident at some point as you're progressing through a cycle of coming up with a project, talking about it, doing the background work, and commercializing it. And the faster you can get through that cycle, the better. The better for the customer, the better for you as business owner. But there is also something to be said for slowing down and letting the right answer emerge. And that's what I learned. If you go, there are those people who just like to disrupt. They like to go through, make quick decisions, and if they fail, make new decisions. But in manufacturing, that can be pretty hazardous.
Yeah.
The time cycles for getting equipment, for example, they're long. Installing it and testing it and making sure everything is working correctly. Those things take time, and people want fast decisions. And sometimes, in my case, what I learned is the right answer is going to percolate up through all the noise, and I'll figure it out eventually.
Right.
But I have to take time to kind of consider everything, and just making a knee-jerk decision is not usually, in my experience, that's not usually the right decision. There are those who say, okay, follow your intuition. And there's truth to that. But there's also, I think, value in following a process, knowing what your process is, and then letting it work.
Right. For sure. You make an interesting point regarding manufacturing. My father worked for Ford, and that's something that company was always pretty good at doing. Is they were rarely the leader in innovations. They'd buy companies that innovated something just for the technology or something. They'd let somebody else do the risk and other stuff, but they get it right and dialed in, and they do it in their own time. And it's been I hadn't thought of it that way before, but yeah, in manufacturing, you definitely want to make sure you have everything lined up beforehand. There's a lot of costs associated with that type of scale.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So what trends? I mean, you're still working in the industry in some capacity, right? Consulting and such. Right. Okay. What trends excite you in that industry, and how are you preparing to leverage them?
So, like you said, I'm still consulting for some companies in the industry. One of the trends that really has me pretty interested right now is, and this is not necessarily new, but it's gaining momentum. For years there had been a push towards organic certification. Some of these certifications that are available that represent improvements over conventional methods. So the use, for example, of fewer chemical pesticides, the importance of stewardship of the land. And what we're seeing right now that I think is pretty interesting is a shift from just organic farming methods and production methods. Some of the inputs that we use, the base materials, come from fermentation of grains or corn, or even cassava in some cases, where you're you're making basic building blocks and turning those into amino acids or other organic acids that are used in some of our processing methods. There were huge supply chain disruptions over the last several years. That's not news to anybody, but one of the things that has emerged is not just sustainable processing methods, but actually regenerative processing methods, where there's a push to make farms not just more productive on an absolute basis, but improve their efficiency over time in terms of the health of the land and its ability to continue to produce without a bunch of added inputs. Sometimes these are kind of complicated and they're a little bit perilous because maybe there's a role for livestock on that land, but also different kinds of crops being cultivated at once, complementary crops. And it's not quite as easy as just running a tractor up and down the field, with a plow, as has been done for the last 100+ years.
Well, it might expand on that a little bit, because my understanding was for thousands of years, what they would do is they would rotate. They'd have the animals come in and use that land for a while. Then they'd rotate them back out and use it for farming again. And that was sort of the natural recycling of the land, instead of just throwing on chemicals and retilling it.
Right. Yeah, and you've kind of captured it. So, but maybe it's not even a rotation so much as it is a cohabitation.
Okay.
Like where you've got some livestock on the land, plus these understory crops, plus maybe, productive trees above those that produce nuts or fruit or something like that. It's pretty new, and I have a lot of learning left to do, but it seems like you can improve yields of all the above just by cultivating them together.
Right.
A more natural kind of system. And, it's actually more resilient too, because
they defend each other in a sense.
Yeah. Or if something fails, it's not a complete failure.
Right.
If you have a monoculture, though, and something fails, it could be pretty disastrous for the farmer and for the market.
You could lose the whole crop.
Yeah.
Everything. Right.
Okay.
Usually when I ask people about trends, it's all about AI right now, which
yeah. So I'm thinking backwards.
Oh, I love it because actually somebody else I recently talked to as well was talking about maybe not really a backlash, but there'll be maybe a bit of a push back, a desire for humanity, some sort of human interactions, right? And how a lot of people, millennials and end up are really lacking that sort of connection, I guess, at their job, right? And feeling valued and stuff, and not just producing and being a number, and their reward for working is the number of units. they're paid for the number of units they created, something. So but I have to go back to, as a scientist, some of the stuff, whether it's physics or medicine, there's examples of how AI can actually solve a lot of our physics, the grand unified theory and other stuff, way faster and better than we can, which that's kind of exciting, and the new technologies that might come out of those sort of breakthroughs. But in the biological sense, they have modeling now, which is super good. They can basically engineer amino acid sequences to create proteins to do whatever you want, right? You were basically getting, the AI is helping with that so much that we're going to be able to, basically we're talking like nanobots, right? You can basically engineer things to do whatever you want. You put this motor over here and this one over here to bind to this, and so it can, right? So that stuff, like a lot of AI, is very exciting and scary to me.
Right. Yeah. I think about that all the time, but I don't necessarily think about it in the context of the work that I've done over time. Maybe because I'm in the middle of a transition, and so trying to stay in front of those kinds of trends feels a little less urgent. But where I think about it all the time, I mentioned I've got kids at home.
Right.
And my daughter just graduated high school, and my son, will be a junior. And I'm trying to think about how do I counsel them or advise them as they go into the world and select careers. My daughter will start college in the fall. What do I tell her is going to be important? And the thing is, I really don't know anymore. Maybe
Right.
10 years ago, I had a fair sense, but AI is changing everything so quickly
Right.
that I'm not quite sure how to navigate it. All I know is that it's going to be very important to have that as part of your skill set.
Right.
Yeah.
It's hard to advise in this environment, right? And be a proper leader. It's complex, right? Well, how would you describe your leadership style?
My leadership style, again, I'm going to come back to the keyword of being patient. I've never had great results with, and I think most people would agree with this, the table pounding leader that makes, demands and says, just figure it out without actually being patient, showing how you want things done, isn't as successful, I think. Maybe they are in some ways, but I know that I've had employees tell me that the reason that they stuck around and the reason that they like their job is because of management.
Nice.
Because we built a team and we built a culture, and it was one that was forgiving. Early on, we implemented what's called ISO 9001. Back then, it was ISO 9001 2008, and now I think the standard is ISO 9001 2015 or 2021. But in any case, this was a comprehensive quality management system. And we built it because we wanted a framework, a formalized framework for producing quality products coming out of the plant. These are intended for human consumption after all, so safety is a primary concern. And one of the principles of that quality management system is when something goes wrong, figure out what went wrong and address the defect in the system. And it was never about blame, right? Everybody makes a mistake.
Right.
Something happened. It was never a punitive action. It was not, oh, you're fired. It was, whoa.
Progressive. Right.
Yeah. What happened here? Let's fix it. And so when I say patience, that's an example of, let's understand what people, some people are really good at checking everything at the door when they come into the office in the morning. Right. Some people bring a little bit of that baggage inside with them, and it can be distracting. Right. But as long as we haven't created an environment where people feel comfortable and confident to do their jobs, right, I think you have better outcomes. I don't think it really helps to, as they drag some of that baggage through the door with them that might be troubling or upsetting or cause them to be a little preoccupied. If you layer, more demands on top of that too fast, I think you just end up with paralysis. You certainly don't end up with best work, and you don't end up with qualities, quality out.
That's gold, Gameil. Excellent. Good stuff. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can you share a book or podcast or mentor that significantly influenced your outlook on health, wealth, your success?
Oh, I don't listen to many podcasts. What I love to do, and this is, it's a little nerdy. I never took a business class, and I never took a class in economics. One thing that I would love to do, I'd spend long days in the office. When my kids were younger, I should point out my wife goes to work very early in the mornings. So a lot of times they would be winding down by 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and I'd just be finishing my day. So whenever that was going to happen, I would say, okay, I'm going to take a late night. And I'd stay in the office, everybody'd leave at 5. I'd be there till 7 or 8 o'clock at night, getting a few things done. And what I'd love to do, Tim, is I'd love to pick up an Economist magazine before it was, on my phone, and go grab a bite of dinner on the way home and just read a topic, read a set of articles in The Economist, because I had no formal training there.
Right.
And this was always fascinating to me. There's always a new discussion about finance. There's always a new discussion about business practices. And for years, I had a subscription, and I loved to read that magazine. I found it trustworthy, and I found it informative.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. And at any point, do you want to write and share some of your insights, in your opinions, and on such articles?
I've never thought. I mean, as you're reading an article, you always have, thoughts, and opinions. I've never thought about actually capturing them and putting them down someplace, but that could be interesting. I just found it more educational than anything else because, you don't know what your blind spots are until they're revealed to you. And a lot of times in business, I learned I really don't know much about topic X. I don't know much about the finer points of finance, or I don't know much about, how interest rates end up being set and how that can impact, the loans that we have outstanding and so on.
How do you approach learning new skills like that?
It's almost always through reading.
Okay.
Reading and then doing, because what I've learned is for myself, I need some context. I need some information to kind of understand, what the framework is, and then there's really no substitute from just doing it. In my view,
For sure.
that was true in the lab. You can read a lot of theoretical stuff, but until you sit down and start going through a protocol and getting the results, it's not quite as meaningful. I've actually noticed I think most of us are that way. You got to do it.
Right. 100%. So is reading how you stay informed on sort of your investment front as well?
Yeah, absolutely. But I wouldn't, here's where I hate to admit that I don't do deep dives into books as much as I do short articles electronically.
Okay.
That's how I like to end the day is, go to my chair and grab my phone, and I've got a few subscriptions to different publications, and I like to read them.
What publications?
Right now, like I said, I've got The Economist.
Okay.
I used to have a subscription to Science and also to Nature. What I realized is that I quit reading those over time, and I let them lapse because I wanted to learn more about those areas where I didn't feel like I had much knowledge.
Okay.
In business or in investing and finance, I like to have a full coverage. So I've got a subscription right now to the Wall Street Journal.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got a subscription to the Washington Post and the Times, and then also I'm going to look at my phone right now because they're all right here, front and center. Market Watch.
Okay.
So, it's a pretty broad spectrum of information.
Right.
And I try not to just engage in one source, which reinforces my own biases. I would really rather have a variety of opinions and information that I can sort through and then try to arrive at some reasonable conclusions for myself.
Okay. And as a fellow parent, you're ahead of me. You win. You have older kids.
Yeah.
How are you sharing your insights and such things and habits and stuff with them?
Okay, you'll love this. This is just coincidental, but this was last night's discussion.
All right.
And we've always made it a point to try and have family dinners, right? Where we all have busy lives. They've got sports and volunteering and jobs and activities, and we're a two-working parent household. But one of the things we've always tried to emphasize is getting around the table for family dinners, and there we discuss different topics. One of the things I've always tried to talk to them about is saving and investing, just because it's important to me. It's one of my areas of interest. So just yesterday, my daughter comes home. She's got a job at a daycare. She's been saving like crazy. We realized that her savings account at the university credit union where she opened an account years ago was paying 0.1%. She moved everything to a high yield money market,
Okay.
which now is 0.7%. And I'm like, this is great. You're making 70 times more
Yep.
on your money. And I actually sat them down. My son was, sort of, oh, here we go again.
Yep.
But I said, let's do some math. And so we started calculating, what if this were 5%?
Matt, we came back to math.
It came back to math. And I actually was saying, okay, here, pull up your calculator and we'll do this on your phone. How much would you have after 10 years? Let's say, you're graduated from college and you've got a $60,000 salary as a starting professional, and you can save 10% of that or 15% of that a year. What does that look like over 10 or 20 or 30 years? And we actually went through this exercise together. The reason my son's rolling his eyes is because this is a lesson in compound interest, and we've talked about it a lot.
Okay. Yep.
It's like, Dad, we know what's going to happen.
Nice.
Like, let's just do the math. Let's just see the numbers.
This is fun.
They're always like, whoa, that's better than I thought.
Right.
And I was telling her, you're not going to feel it now because the numbers are small, but as soon as you get to the steep part of that curve, that becomes much more interesting. And that's not going to happen for another, 10 or 20 years. But when it happens, it's going to be remarkable.
Right. That's kind of the life lesson, right? For it's not just financial. It's all the things in your life that you manage. Just, eating the Twinkie, not eating the Twinkie, right? It seems like a little thing, a little difference, but it adds up over time.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So on a similar note then, what do you wish you knew about success and building wealth earlier in your career?
So if we've had this, word patience emerge a couple of times, but I also think there's something to be said for embracing an appetite for risk.
Okay.
And those of us who lived through 2008 as adults with responsibilities kind of went through a pretty precarious time. My kids, your kids, they have no idea. We did our jobs as parents because I think we protected them from, some of that fallout. But as an adult, you're looking at this going, holy cow, this is worse than I thought, or this is potentially worse than I thought. The opportunities were great. And I think if I were going to go back and do it again, I think I would have taken more risk when there were opportunities.
Right.
And in particular, in real estate, and this isn't patting you on the back. This is, man, there was a corridor. And so I live in Salt Lake City. There was a corridor, busy street that started to turn. And I thought this would be a great place to invest, but I couldn't bring myself to do it because of those fears.
Right.
And I think that if I were going to go back and revisit, some of those decision-making processes, I would just do it. It's easy to say with hindsight, but it's those instincts were correct,
right?
Even if I couldn't bring myself to take an action.
Right. There's a great is it a TED Talk maybe? I don't remember. Tim Ferriss. Are you familiar with Tim Ferriss?
I don't know Tim Ferriss.
He's a Tim, so he's awesome, and he's bald, so he's awesome. But he has his own podcast. He does all sorts of stuff. Interesting dude. But he had a talk on fear setting. And so instead of goal setting, he said he thinks it's often more important to in terms of taking action when you see opportunity arise and able to take advantage of it, is to work through all the possible outcomes, right? And that's how what's the worst case scenario? What would that mean? Well, how would I deal with that, right? And the more you have, you put together, plan B and plan C, and you have contingencies for the worst case scenario, then you get bolder, right? You're more confident that, all right, I can handle the worst case scenario with this, and anyway, similarly, I was in similar situations as you, right? And different opportunities had come up in the past. And like a lot of people, kick themselves for not getting into the real estate industry at the low end of the cycle, right? Kind of like right now, right? We're not at the top end of the cycle.
Right.
And I know I was at a conference in Laguna Beach earlier this year, and there were just people so excited to get like office space for 10 cents on the dollar. And most of us like, office? That's like way down. That's particularly some markets, right? Like maybe New York or San Francisco, where it's not coming back anytime soon, but they're still like, yeah, but I can buy this $50 million building for like $6 million.
Right.
Anyway, so and those are guys who had been through, been in the industry for 40 years and been through multiple cycles, and they're like, yeah, it'll come back. Trust me. So
Yeah. Well, that's the hindsight part.
Right.
They have that experience, and if you didn't have that experience, you look at it with a whole different set of eyes. And I think, if these guys are, if the seasoned guys are willing to take those steps, then those of us who maybe aren't as experienced should take comfort in that.
Right. And I'm not a big fan of necessarily timing the market. I like things with a business plan. You go in, you do it, and you add value. And if the market appreciates in that time, that's just gravy, right?
Right.
But what's the Warren Buffett saying? Be fearful when others are greedy, and be greedy when others are fearful. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel right now about at least the commercial multifamily market, which is what I focus on. So thank you for that. Yeah. So what's next for you? You have any exciting things on the horizon?
Like I mentioned earlier, it's a bit of a transitional time. So we sold our business successfully, which was really nice. And I'm still consulting for the new ownership group, helping through that transition. And I was actually just thinking about this yesterday. I was on site, I was driving home, and I thought, I can do this as long as they need me to do this, because it's not a huge time commitment. It feels good to actually make sure that the current stakeholders are all taken care of, whether that's the new ownership group or whether that's customers that I've dealt with for a long time. I want to make sure that those guys are all, handled well. So that's occupying a big part of my time. The other part is more personal in nature. I think this is every parent's feeling. Like, did I spend enough time with my kids and with my family as I went through this process? And I'd like to think I struck a pretty good balance, but I'm also aware of the clock ticking. And for the next couple of years while they're here, well, my daughter will be out pretty soon, but I just want to spend a little more time.
Right.
That's the near-term plan. And after that, I've actually been thinking about this quite a bit, which is I think something is going to emerge on its own. I've got a bunch of ideas of things I'd like to do. But I'm not wed to any one of those things, because I think the right answer is going to make itself known.
As you're exercising patience.
Yeah.
Nice.
I'm interested. I don't know. Life is short, and there's so many interesting things. So, you can't possibly do them all, but do a few and see what bubbles up to the surface.
Right. Okay. Well, it sounds like you also are kind of relationship based, like good business practices are, and like you said, taking care of the previous relationships, maintaining those, and make sure everybody comes out and successfully.
Well, to bring it full circle, the AI part is, like we were talking about earlier, you still need those personal relationships. You can accelerate a lot of the work, but ultimately we need to be face to face with one another, and that's how a lot of business gets done. That's how a lot of deals get done. It's a handshake, and it's building trust, and it's establishing those relationships over time. And actually, that's kind of the fun of the business.
Right. That's something I didn't appreciate as much early on for me, was how important those relationships are. I just figured, the returns, the bottom line were, the returns were the bottom line. But it's funny how if you work with quality people you like, the returns actually will be fine.
Yeah, that's
you trust and stuff. The others are paramount, and the other stuff works itself out.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, Gameil. For our listeners who want to learn more about your Connect, where can they find you?
Find me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, they can find me on LinkedIn, certainly.
Okay.
That's where I am. And, I'm always available by an email or a phone call. I'm Gameil at fouadgroup.com, Gameil at fouadgroup.com. And, I'm plugged in every day, one way or another.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you for watching, and thank you very much, Gameil, for joining me today. We appreciate you sharing your story and insights into success in this crazy and beautiful world. Thank you.
It's always a pleasure, Tim. It's so good to see you.
Yes, great seeing you as always.
Inspired by our guests? Visit phoenixprosperitypodcast.com/guest and join us on the show and share your success story with Tim. The spotlight awaits.